On June 14, 2026, two helicopters were flying separate routes over the Recreio dos Bandeirantes neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. One aircraft, a Bell 206 Jet Ranger 3, carried pilot Alexandra Souza and four passengers, American singer Oliver Tree, Argentine director Lucas Vignal, YouTuber Gaspar Prim, and Brazilian music producer Lucas Frada. The second aircraft was a privately owned Eurocopter AS-350B2, flying solo with pilot Charles Marcelac. Both aircraft had departed in compliance with regulations, but neither crew was aware of the other's presence. At 8:59 a.m., the two helicopters collided directly above an abandoned church and fell into a car dealership parking lot below. The resulting fire spread across a row of electric vehicles, and all 6 individuals involved were killed. Oliver Tree had been in the middle of a major world tour at the time of the accident, having performed in Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo just days earlier. Brazilian aviation authorities confirmed both aircraft were operating in full regulatory compliance at the time of the collision, and the Brazilian Air Force launched a formal investigation into how the two flight paths came to intersect over the densely populated neighborhood. On the morning of January 26, 2020, basketball legend Kobe Bryant boarded a private Sikorsky S-76B helicopter in Orange County, California, headed for a youth tournament at his Mamba Sports Academy. On board were his 13-year-old daughter Gianna, 6 other passengers, and pilot Ara Zobayan. Despite heavy fog over the Santa Monica Mountains that did not meet minimum visibility requirements, Zobayan continued the flight under visual flight rules. After circling for 12 minutes to wait for clearance, the pilot began a final climb but soon experienced spatial disorientation, which caused him to believe he was rising when he was actually descending. The helicopter struck a hillside in Calabasas at approximately 180 miles per hour, killing all 9 people on board instantly. The National Transportation Safety Board later determined the cause was the pilot's decision to fly into clouds he was not certified to navigate. In the early hours of August 6, 2011, 2 U.S. Army CH-47D Chinook helicopters, known as Extortion 16 and Extortion 17, took off in Afghanistan's Logar province. Their mission was to provide a quick reaction force to help Army Rangers capture a Taliban leader. On board Extortion 17 were 30 American Special Operations personnel, 7 Afghan commandos, an interpreter, and a military dog. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone in the Tangi Valley, Taliban fighters fired rocket-propelled grenades from a nearby building. The second grenade struck the helicopter's rear rotor system, causing the rear pylon to rip from the fuselage. The aircraft crashed at full rotor speed, killing all 38 people and the dog. It remains the deadliest single day for the United States military in the entire Afghanistan war. Among the dead were members of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, though officials later clarified that most of those aboard were not part of the specific unit involved in the raid that killed Osama bin Laden 3 months earlier. On August 19, 2002, an overloaded Mi-26 transport helicopter lifted off from Mozdok toward the Konkala military base in Chechnya. While the aircraft was designed to carry 80 troops, it was packed with 142 soldiers and officers who preferred air travel to avoid roadside bombs. As it descended toward the base, Chechen separatist fighters fired a heat-seeking surface-to-air missile that struck one of the engines. The helicopter crash-landed into a minefield within the base's defenses and burst into flames. While the aircraft was designed to carry 80 troops, it was packed with 142 soldiers and officers who preferred air travel to avoid roadside bombs. As it descended toward the base, Chechen separatist fighters fired a heat-seeking surface-to-air missile that struck one of the engines. The helicopter crash-landed into a minefield within the base's defenses and burst into flames. His convoy included 3 helicopters, with Raisi's aircraft carrying high-ranking officials, including the foreign minister. When the group encountered a sudden cloud mass, the other 2 helicopters successfully climbed above it, but Raisi's helicopter disappeared into the clouds. Rescue teams faced dense fog and rugged terrain throughout the night. The wreckage was eventually found the next morning. The helicopter had struck a mountainside and caught fire. All 8 people on board were confirmed dead, and an investigation concluded the crash was caused by striking the terrain on the designated flight path with no evidence of sabotage. On February 4, 1997, 2 Israeli Air Force Yasor CH-53 helicopters collided while ferrying soldiers into southern Lebanon. The helicopters were flying the same corridor in total darkness when the main rotor of one struck the tail of the other. Both aircraft disintegrated and fell 600 feet, killing all 73 soldiers and crew members. This tragedy, the worst in the history of the IDF, sparked a major protest movement that eventually led to Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon 3 years later. On December 8, 2021, India's Chief of Defense Staff, General Bipin Rawat, died when his Mi-17 V5 helicopter crashed near Coonoor, Tamil Nadu. The flight entered sudden cloud cover over forested hills, leading the pilot to become spatially disoriented and lose visual reference to the ground. The helicopter struck a hillside just 6.2 miles from its destination, killing 13 of the 14 people on board immediately. The sole survivor died a week later from his injuries. On January 18, 2023, a Super Puma helicopter carrying Ukraine's Interior Ministry leadership crashed into a kindergarten in Brovary. The crew had taken off in heavy fog without meteorological data or clearance for passenger transport. All 10 people on the helicopter were killed, along with 4 people on the ground, including a child. Finally, the disaster of the 54 occurred on May 10, 1977, when an Israeli Air Force CH-53 struck a hillside in the Jordan Valley during a night training exercise. All 54 people on board were killed when the pilot flew the functioning aircraft directly into the terrain due to a lack of visual references in the dark. On November 6, 1986, a Chinook helicopter operated by British International Helicopters was returning 47 workers from Shell's Brent oil field to Sumburgh Airport in Scotland's Shetland Islands. As the aircraft descended toward the runway at 500 feet, a transmission failure caused the twin rotor blades to collide with each other. The helicopter fell 50 meters into the North Sea and broke apart on impact, sinking beneath the waves before a distress signal could even be sent. Of the 47 people aboard, only the pilot and 1 passenger survived after being pulled from the water by a Coast Guard helicopter. The 45 deaths made it, at the time, the worst civilian helicopter disaster in history. A memorial was later erected near Sumburgh Airport to commemorate all 45 lives lost, and the surviving captain has since spoken publicly about the enduring mystery of why he and 1 other passenger lived while the rest of the men aboard perished that day. On June 2, 1994, an RAF Chinook helicopter carrying 25 of Northern Ireland's most senior intelligence officials, including MI5 officers and Royal Ulster Constabulary personnel, took off from Aldergrove for a security conference in Inverness, Scotland.
Flying low through the Mull of Kintyre, the aircraft encountered dense fog blanketing the hillside terrain. Around 6 p.m., the Chinook flew directly into the hillside at high speed and burst into flames, killing all 29 people on board instantly. 2 Royal Air Force pilots were initially found grossly negligent, a finding that provoked a 17-year dispute among victims' families before both men were formally exonerated. It remains the RAF's worst peacetime disaster.
A later independent review led by Lord Phillip concluded there was insufficient evidence to support the original negligence finding, and newly uncovered Ministry of Defense documents suggested officials had held unresolved concerns about the aircraft's airworthiness 2 years before the crash. On April 29, 2016, an Airbus EC-225 Super Puma helicopter was ferrying 13 oil workers from State Oil's Gullfaks B platform in the North Sea back to Bergen, Norway. As the aircraft approached the small island of Turoy, witnesses saw the main rotor suddenly detach and fly off before the fuselage plunged to the shoreline in a fireball. Investigators later determined that a fatigue crack in a planet gear within the main rotor gearbox had caused a catastrophic mechanical failure with no possibility of pilot recovery. All 13 people on board were killed instantly, and Norway's Aviation Authority immediately grounded the entire fleet of EC-225 helicopters used across the North Sea oil industry. The victims included 11 Norwegians, 1 Briton, and 1 Italian, all working for various oil service contractors on assignment for Statoil, and the tragedy prompted Statoil to temporarily halt production entirely at the Gullfaks B platform out of respect for the dead. On October 27, 2018, Leicester City Football Club owner Vichai Srivadnaprabha boarded his personal Leonardo AW169 helicopter at King Power Stadium following a Premier League match. Moments after clearing the top of the stadium, the helicopter began spinning uncontrollably as it climbed into the night sky. A bearing inside the tail rotor's control system had seized after just 330 flight hours, well short of its 2,400-hour inspection threshold, triggering a catastrophic and unrecoverable failure of yaw control. The aircraft spun 5 times before plunging into the stadium car park and bursting into flames, killing Vichai, his pilot, and 3 others on board. Investigators later confirmed the crash was entirely unsurvivable and free of pilot error, and the pilot's family subsequently pursued a multi-billion-pound legal claim against the manufacturer over the component's design. On April 24, 1980, 8 U.S. Navy RH-53D helicopters launched from the USS Nimitz as part of Operation Eagle Claw, a mission to rescue 53 American hostages held in Tehran. After flying 600 miles through a blinding desert sandstorm, mechanical failures left only 5 helicopters operational, 1 short of the minimum required, forcing commanders to abort the mission at the refueling site known as Desert 1. As the force prepared to withdraw, 1 helicopter attempting to reposition around a disabled C-130 clipped the transport plane with its rotor blades. Both aircraft erupted into flames, killing 5 Air Force airmen and 3 Marines.
The failure led directly to the creation of the U.S. Special Operations Command. The 53 American hostages who had been seized from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran the previous November remained in captivity for months afterward, and the botched rescue attempt became a defining setback of President Jimmy Carter's final year in office. On April 1, 2009, a Bond offshore helicopter Super Puma was carrying 14 oil workers from BP's Miller platform back to Aberdeen, Scotland. 11 miles northeast of Peterhead, the aircraft's main rotor gearbox suffered a catastrophic failure due to a fatigue crack that had gone unaddressed after a magnetic particle warning was misread as unimportant just a week earlier. The main rotor separated entirely from the fuselage, and a lone eyewitness described watching the helicopter fall silently from the sky like a torpedo before plunging into the North Sea. All 16 people on board, including 2 crew members, were killed instantly, and investigators later confirmed the crash was not survivable under any circumstances. A subsequent fatal accident inquiry found that a miscommunication between the operator and the helicopter's manufacturer had led engineers to dismiss the early warning sign as insignificant, and roughly £15 million in compensation was eventually paid out to the victims' families. On June 28, 2005, during Operation Red Wings in Afghanistan's Kunar province, a 4-man Navy SEAL reconnaissance team was compromised and came under heavy Taliban fire in the Hindu Kush Mountains. A quick reaction force of Army Night Stalker pilots and Navy SEALs launched aboard an MH-47 Chinook to attempt a rescue, escorted by attack helicopters that slowed the formation's advance. Deciding to fly in without full protection, the Chinook was struck by a rocket-propelled grenade as it approached the battle, causing catastrophic structural failure and sending it crashing into the mountainside. All 16 men aboard, 8 SEALs and 8 Army aviators were killed instantly, making it the deadliest single incident in Navy SEAL history. On the ground, 3 of the 4 original reconnaissance team members were also killed in the ensuing firefight, leaving Petty Officer Marcus Luttrell as the operation's sole survivor after he was sheltered by villagers until American forces could reach him days later. On August 23, 2013, a CHC Scotia Eurocopter AS-332 Super Puma was on approach to Sumborough Airport in Shetland after stopping at 2 North Sea oil platforms to collect passengers. During the final stages of the instrument approach, the pilots failed to effectively monitor their flight instruments as airspeed dropped to a critically low level. By the time the crew recognized the danger, recovery was no longer possible, and the helicopter plunged into the sea roughly 2 miles from the runway. 4 of the 18 people on board were killed, while 14 others were rescued with injuries. Investigators later found the impact itself had technically been survivable, making the deaths of passengers unable to escape the sinking cabin especially tragic. In the months that followed, Britain's Civil Aviation Authority introduced a series of new offshore helicopter safety rules, including restrictions on flying in severe sea conditions and a requirement that passengers be seated next to emergency exits.